yourself. So you'd hit 2 or 3 cars before you'd start strafing car by car by car. But most of the time, if you found a train, it's full of something going someplace, so you need to knock everything out. And one of the ways we used to do this was get down and just strafe right down the train. We could hit a half a dozen cars. And of course, we carried tracers so that when they hit, you know where they're hitting. So you could see that your line was just traveling right down the top of the train beautifully.
Further behind the lines, the B-25s of the 12th Air Force hammered away at major railroad installations in northern Italy. These were some of the toughest targets in the theater. While the interdiction campaign continued, the Army Air Force began to experiment in Italy with closer cooperation with the ground forces.
We had communications with the GIs, radio communications, all the time. And usually we had a man with the people we're supporting primarily, who was with the ground, and where we get ready to go to a target, he can talk to us. We also had a small plane that usually worked around, and something we found out there was that if you're colorblind, you can see through camouflage. And we'd get colorblind people to act as one of the observers in this light plane to help us pinpoint our target.
Thunderbolt pilots became especially adept at helping out the GIs in the front lines. Veteran P-47 pilots learned to accurately hit targets less than 150 yards from American positions.
I got into combat, and very quickly all of our missions are supporting the Army. Well, I took a dim view of that until we started getting a lot of personal contact with these people on the ground. We were their lifesavers forever. And it wasn't long until I didn't care whether I ever saw a plane in the air to fight with. The mission that we did for all these people on the ground was so fantastic. That's all I need. And I loved it.
By mid-1944, the lessons of the Italian campaign were adopted by the other Allied tactical air forces. During the invasion of France in the summer of 1944, those skills and methods soon created the most effective tactical air campaign in the history of warfare.
Our first job was interdiction, of the rail lines and the airfields and all that kind of stuff. And canals and barges and anything that moved, we clobbered, and we'd go on lots of missions over next to Germany and into Germany even, where we'd fly in high, escort the bombers in, the B-8th Air Force bombers, and then hit the deck and come home shooting things up, see, on the way home.
The RAF's 2nd Tactical Air Force joined forces with the American 9th Air Force, commanded by the irrepressible Pete Casada, to execute the pre-invasion air plan. Using Hawker Typhoons, the RAF ravaged German radar sites along the coast. De Havilland Mosquitoes flew low-altitude pinpoint raids on key installations. Spitfires and RAF Mustangs conducted on-the-treetops reconnaissance, photographing the invasion beaches from as little as 25 feet. Simultaneously, the 9th Air Force undertook Operation Chattanooga Choo-Choo. Hundreds of American P-38s and P-47s prowled the skies over western France, searching for trains. When they found a train or locomotive, down they'd swoop to shoot them to pieces with cannon, machine guns, rockets, and bombs.
It was very dangerous to be in any train because I think the Allied fighters must have had orders to shoot at any train that was on any track. And I think after the war was over, the assumption proved to be true because there were locomotives standing all over the place that were all shot to pieces.
In one stretch of attacks in the last week before D-Day, over 800 locomotives were destroyed by the fighter bombers. As the fighter bombers demolished the Third Reich's rolling stock, the B-26 Marauders of the 9th Air Force pounded away at rail yards and bridges.
Being a tactical aircraft, our targets were essentially anything that would hold up the Nazi capacity to move divisions, to move artillery, to move anything. So our missions were essentially railroad bridges, railroads, ammunition, refineries, bridges, tactically anything that could keep them. And toward the end of the war, where the Germans had been able to move a division in a matter of a day or so, they couldn't move that division in 2 weeks.
By June 1st, 1944, their efforts had reaped huge rewards. Of the 27 bridges over the Seine that had been targeted, 24 had been destroyed and the other 3 severely damaged. Rail traffic in western France had been reduced to a crawl. As Allied air power destroyed Germany's rail, sea, and river corridors, the Wehrmacht grew increasingly reliant on vehicle convoys to deliver supplies to the front. But as D-Day approached, even these would soon be ravaged by the men of Attack.Air. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched the greatest seaborne invasion in history. The D-Day landings were a marvel of planning and execution. And as the troops stormed the beaches, the tactical air forces were there to give them support. While the heavies and mediums pounded the coast, behind the beaches, roving groups of fighter bombers swept down on German reinforcements and artillery racing forward to stop the Allied invasion. Moving on roads became virtual suicide for German tankers and armored infantry. Rocket-launching Typhoons, Mustangs, and Thunderbolts ravaged entire panzer formations in the days after the invasion. The experience of the Panzer Lehr Division was typical. As the largest panzer division in France, the unit received orders to march for the beaches following the Allied landing. In 2 days of marching, the division lost 300 vehicles to fighter bomber attack. For the next 2 months, the fighter bombers whittled down the panzer divisions while the Marauders and Havocs choked off any hope of reinforcements by working over the French rail system again. At the end of July, the Americans finally pierced the German defenses at St. Lo. Rushing through the gap, columns of American tanks and armored vehicles spread out behind German lines. Quesada assigned each American column a constant umbrella of 4 fighter bombers. These 4 planes would scout ahead of the American armor and clear the road of any German obstacle. At the same time, the GIs would use their new radios to talk to the pilots directly. They'd call out targets and then hunker down until the planes swooped in and took out the German positions.
Often we'd go out and we'd get all kinds of notes from the ground forces, what a fantastic job we'd done, and they would tell us, this is what we found you had done away with on that particular mission. And of course that was our